Bosi, we're continuing today in Maseches Peah, and we find ourselves in Perek Zayin Mishna Ches and Perek Ches Mishna Aleph. So we'll be finishing the last Mishnah in chapter 7 and beginning in Emet Hashem, the first Mishnah in chapter 8. So Mishnah Ches, Mishnah 8 in chapter 7 says as follows: Hamakdish Kamo Achlono Deboa Olalos. So here's the following situation: a person consecrated his field before the olalos were visible. In other words, I makdish my field, I consecrate my field at an early stage in the field's maturation, before we're able to tell which clusters are developed or which clusters are not developed. So then what's the halacha? Eina olalos la'aniyim. In this case again, the olalos do not belong to the poor. Now the obvious, why not? Because remember, any property that is owned by the Beis Hamikdash, anything that is hekdish, by definition is exempt from all different types of tithes, as well as agricultural obligations to the poor. So since this field was consecrated when it was a quote-unquote young field, therefore by the time the olalos develop, it's already the possession of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore the poor have no claim. However, mishenodu bo olalos ha'olos la'aniyim. However, if I consecrated the field, once the underdeveloped clusters were already visible, thereby becoming the property of the poor, so therefore they still belong to the poor even after I consecrate the vineyard to the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Yossi says no. Yitnu schar gidulav lahegdish. Ultimately, again, interestingly enough, the Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah says that halacha l'maisa is the following situation: even if you made your field hektish, even if you consecrated your field after the olalos were recognizable, so therefore again the poor people are permitted to go ahead and take the olalos for themselves. Rabbi Yossi says that halacha l'maisa, the poor have to pay the Beis Hamikdash for the amount of value in the growth, or I should say the amount of growth that the olalos experienced between the time that the field was consecrated and the time that the poor went ahead and took the olalos. In other words, let's illustrate this. Let's say, for argument's sake, just for way of illustration. So on the first of Adar, I go ahead and I consecrate my field, and at that time, the olalos, right, the underdeveloped clusters are visible. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, they belong to the poor. Now, so again, the first opinion in the Mishnah says they belong to the poor, and that's it. The poor are able to take them. Rabbi Yossi says, well, here's the problem. The problem is that when the poor go ahead and ultimately collect them, there's some amount of time. For example, I consecrated the field on the 1st of Adar, and the poor come to collect the olalos on the 1st of Nisan, which means that those olalos were nourished from consecrated property for a month. So Rabbi Yossi says the poor, when they take the olalos, have to compensate the Beis Hamikdash for the amount of value they gained from the growth of the olalos from the time it was consecrated until the time ultimately it was harvested. Very interesting. Ezu hi shichacha ba'aris. So it's an interesting case. What's the case of shichacha? In vines that grow across a wooden frame. So an aris, if you could imagine again, is a wooden frame, and you have vines that are like snaked around the frame. So what's the halacha of shichacha? In other words, remember again, the halacha of shichacha means I leave something, I forget something behind. So at what point in time is something considered to be left behind if it's growing on a wooden frame? Kol sheni yachol lifshot es yado v'litla. Any time that you've moved enough, so now I'm picking grapes, I moved away, I forgot something on the vine, and now I'm too far to be able to reach it with my hand. If I'm too far to be able to reach it with my hand, at that point in time, it becomes shichacha. Ube ruglios mishiyavor hemena. What about again, in this case, ruglios are vines that are spread out on the ground. At what point in time do grapes left on those vines become shichacha? The moment the farmer passes it by. Mishiyavor hemena. Once you pass by it, halacha l'maisa, becomes shechacha. Incredible. But say Mazel Tov on completing Perek Zayin of Maseches Peah. We now find ourselves in Perek Ches, chapter 8, the final Perek of Maseches Peah. Incredible. So Mishnah Aleph, Perek Ches, Mishnah Aleph says as follows: Me'emasai, kol adam mutar beleket. This is a very interesting case. At what point in time does everyone become permitted in leket? In other words, remember again, leket is our stalks that are left behind. So remember again, at a certain point in time, what the Mishnah is telling me is, I have to assume the poor already went through, right? They took what they were going to take, and now whatever is left is hefker. So really what it's asking is, at what point in time does leket become hefker, become ownerless, and therefore usable or collectible by anyone? Mishielcha nemushos. Once the nemushos, so who are the nemushos? So the Bartanura explains over here, Zikenim haholchim al mishantam. These are the older people, right? The elderly paupers who kind of walk very slowly with their walking sticks. So because they walk slowly, and because often their eyes are trained on the ground, they often arrive last to collect any of these items. So once they've gone by, once the nemushos have gone by, the elderly people who walk supported, halacha again, so the two things. Number one, they walk slowly, so they collect anything they see. Number two, they look down. And number three, they're often the last group to come, the last group of poor to come. So once that group goes through, anything that's left over at that point in time is considered to be hefker, and anyone is permitted to go ahead and take it. Uba parrot, uba olalos. What about parrot and olalos? Remember again, parrot and olalos refer to items left behind, or items that fall down from grapes in the vineyard. Mishiachu ha'aniyim bekerem ve'avo. After the poor have kind of gone through the vineyard, gone forward and gone back. In other words, once they make two trips through the vineyard back and forth, at that point in time we assume anything that was going to be collected has been collected, and therefore halacha l'maisa, anything else is going to be hefker. Ubezesim. What about with olives? Misheter derviyashnia. Once the second rainfall comes, anything left behind in the fields from olives, once the second rainfall comes, is considered to be hefker, ownerless. On Rabbi Yehuda says, "I valo yeshena moskin," as they say, ela lachar bishnia. But there are some people who don't even begin to harvest their olives until after the second rainfall. So how can you say again? In other words, remember, all of the halachos of leket, shichecha, these are all halachas that apply to harvest. So comes along Rabbi Yehuda and says there are some people that don't even begin to harvest their olives until after the second rainfall. How can you say that after the second rainfall everything already becomes hefker? Maybe bar soros. So Rabbi Yehuda has a different approach. Rabbi Yehuda says, at what point in time do leftover olives in the field become hefker? When there are such little olives. In other words, when there are so few left behind that you aren't able to even bring 4 isurim's worth, right? An isur is, the Bartanur says, an isur is a small coin. So when there's not even enough olives left, right? Not even 4 isers worth of olives left. At that point in time, that means pretty much the field has been picked dry. At that point in time, anything that is left will be considered hefker. Wonderful. We'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up with Mishna Beis tomorrow in Parak Chas, Mishnah Beis and Gimel. Have a wonderful day.